Today I'm going to reveal one of the most important secrets in chess. If you go from not doing this to starting to do this, I guarantee your game will improve. And if you're playing people that are already doing this and you're not doing this well, you're probably having a hard time winning. Welcome to Chess Dog. I'm John Montgomery, and today I'm going to reveal one of the great secrets of chess. It's a secret that Bobby Fischer had mastered, and it begins by looking at this structure in front of us. Now, the name of this structure, yes, this structure has an actual name, is called the focus formation. It's most commonly seen in the Ruy Lopez or Spanish opening. It's also seen in the King's Indian defense when someone plays an exchange variation. And it looks like a perfectly symmetrical structure, but in fact there are differences. You'll notice that this square d5 is a permanent weakness in the position, yet d4 is not weak. So white can put a piece on d5, preferably a knight, but black cannot put a piece on d4. That's to white's advantage. If black wants to put a knight in an advanced position, he would actually have to play c4, then route the knight all the way to the d3 square. White also has the ability to play g3, f4, and attack in that way. And the name of this structure came from Max Erber, who was the president of FIDE at one time. I believe he was world champion for 1 year. And he wrote a great book on structures many decades ago, and he named this the focus formation. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this is one of Fischer's specialties. And here's the secret. Here's the cheat code to chess unlocked. Fischer's big secret. What Fischer did was he had specific structures that he knew inside and out. I mean, he knew every little idiosyncrasy of the structures. And he would play an opening repertoire to create those structures, to have those structures reappear over and over and over again. And that's a very important secret of chess, to learn specific pawn structures and to really master them, and then sort of build your opening repertoire in such a way that those structures appear over and over and over again. This specific structure appears in Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games no less than 4 times. And he creates this intentionally each time. Now let's jump in and watch. We're not going to go into as much detail in the games as I normally do because it's about watching him recreate this structure and win with this structure over and over. But let's jump right in. The first game we look at is Bobby Fischer against Ruben Chokran. And Ruben Chokran actually plays quite well with black. This is a Spanish opening. We'll go through the opening very quickly. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the distinctive move of the Ruy Lopez. a6, bishop a4, knight f6 castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3 castles, c3. Today it's very common to see black play the pawn to d5 here, or the Marshall attack, but Ruben Chokran played the traditional d6 main line. After h3, knight a5, bishop c2, c5, d4, queen to c7, we have a standard Chigorin Ruy Lopez, sort of the absolute main line, really, of the Spanish opening. Knight b to d2, the idea is to play the knight to f1, maneuver it to g3 or e3, bishop to d7, knight f1. This line is played even still today, but white does do pretty well in this position. Rook f to e8. This is a classic idea for black and the Ruy Lopez. The idea is he will play g6, play the bishop back to f8, and then to g7, and await developments in the center and be ready for anything white might try. Knight to e3, g6 keeps the knight out of f5. In this position, computers seem to prefer moves like b3 or bishop to d2, maintaining the tension. But Bobby Fischer in this position played d takes e5, followed by, of course, d takes e5, and now look what we have. We have our focus formation. Now in this position, when Bobby Fischer took on e5, he was aware that this wasn't necessarily the theoretically best move. That wasn't what was important to him. What was important is that he was creating a structure that he was confident he knew better than his opponent, and he was right. d e5, so he's created the focus formation. Knight to h2. What is he doing? He wants to put the knight in on e3 on d5. So the idea is play knight h2 to g4 and distract that f6 knight away. So now the d5 square would not be defended. Rook a to d3, queen to f3. The rook is now opposite the queen. So if the light squared bishop moved, it would be threatening the queen. So he gets that out of the way. Bishop to e6. This is the most accurate move. He could play a move like h5 to try to keep the knight out of g4, but then after queen to g3, white has all kinds of threats. Knight f5, because there's a pin on the g pawn, getting on the dark squares there, g5, h6. So bishop e6 is definitely the most accurate move. Knight h to g4, knight g4, hg4. By taking with the pawn, he's preserving that knight on e3. It can still jump into d5, but now he has an open h-file. He can play the pawn to g3, king g2, rook h1, and attack down the h-file. Queen to c6, adding to the defense of the d5 square, g5. And Fischer actually said in his notes that he thought the move queen to g3 would be better here, and modern computers agree with that assessment. g5, knight to c4. Chokran would love to trade off that knight, but of course Fischer would never do it. Actually, in this position, bishop g5 might actually be the best move here, just going ahead and grabbing that pawn and telling white, prove it. But as it turns out, Fischer understood the position better than his opponent, so his opponent was unaware of that idea. So he did not take that pawn at g5, knight to c4. Now knight to g4, threatening to hop into the f6 and h6 squares. So black chops it off. Queen to g4. And now a big reveal here. In 2 games of Fischer's, in my 60 memorable games, 2 of the games get to this exact point. This is move 22. And only here do they diverge. The other game was against Unzicker, who played f6. But after pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, you can already see white is better. He's got the 2 bishops. He's got the healthier pawn structure because black has an isolated pawn on e5, and he has a much safer king. With someone of Fischer's caliber, that was enough in and of itself. So we won't go over that game, but you can just see 2 bishops, better pawn structure, safer king. That's it. You can't do that with Fischer. You're going to lose. Knight to b6, g3, beginning this process of king g2, rook h1, and attacking down the h-file. c4. So we see this weakness at d3, but look how slow it is. I mean, black won't have time to get a piece on that square, or not a knight anyway. King g2, knight d7, and rook to h1. So now the knight's going to have to go to f8 to defend h7. Now, surprisingly to me, computers see this as equal, but I would much rather have white here. I think the computers see this as equal because computers can see perfect defensive play, which human beings just can't do. But I think white's just better here. Knight f8, b4. He wants to play a4 and open the a file for his rook and maybe create a weakness at b5. If black takes en passant, then after bishop to b3, that bishop is very aggressively posted, aiming at the f7 square. Black doesn't have time to capture that pawn on c3 with his queen. White's pieces would just become way too active then. So he plays queen to e6, obviously offering a trade of queens. Black would love for queens to come off the board and all those threats down the h-file to go away. Queen to e2, avoiding the exchange. Now a5. So black says, well, I'll break on the queen side first. And Fischer goes ahead and takes the pawn. Now he's created 3 pawn weaknesses here. a5, a2, and c3. But he's saying, I've got so much pressure. Black just doesn't have time to take these pawns. If he tries, I'm going to get my pieces active and win with dynamic play. And that's, in fact, what happens. Chokran plays queen to a6, bishop e3, queen to a5, a4, opening up, not even caring about the c3 pawn dropping. Too much dynamism in the position. After this and this, Fischer thought this was actually equal if Chokran had played this way, and maybe he's right, but I mean, it's Fischer, so he's almost certainly right. And nevertheless, I think I'd rather have white here as well. Rook to a8, ab5, queen b5, rook h b1, hitting the queen. Queen c6, rook to b6, queen to c7. Now, this game is strayed a little bit from our topic, which is finding that structure and recreating it over and over, but this game has such a nice ending, such a beautiful tactical shot. I'd be remiss if I didn't go over it with you. Rook to a6, rook a6, rook a6, rook c8, queen to g4. Now, that overloads black's queen on c7. White is putting pressure on the c8 rook, which is defended by the queen, and he's threatening rook to a7, skewering the queen to the bishop. And if he does that, the queen can't defend both pieces. He would have to give up one or the other. The queen is overloaded, and Fischer is applying pressure. So he plays knight to e6, plays bishop to a4, puts the bishop on the most active diagonal, rook to b8, rook to c6. Now, up to this point, Chokran has defended incredibly accurately. It's really amazing, in fact, how well he defends. I didn't really know this player outside of this game, but he's played quite impressive chess up to this point. But now he gets in trouble. He plays queen to d8. The refutation of this move, queen to d8, is incredibly beautiful. First of all, he plays rook to e6. Now, that seems on the surface to be a pretty obvious exchange sacrifice. And if black takes the rook, it would be. After pawn takes queen e6, white's just easily winning here. After even king f8, queen takes pawn, king f7, bishop c6 with the threat of coming into d5. Black simply has no chance of survival here whatsoever. But Chokran came up with a pretty ingenious move, or at least it appears to be. He plays the move queen to c8, which actually pins the rook to the queen. So if the rook moves, the queen would be lost. And it looks like Chokran is actually winning an exchange. But then Fischer comes up with this real zinger. Bishop to d7. Wow. And Chokran resigned in this position. If he takes that bishop that looks like it's just sitting there hanging, rook takes g6 check. The queen would now be undefended, and after taking the rook, Fischer would take the queen. So that's two of the games that he plays this focus formation. Let's look quickly at a couple more. In this game, he's playing the legendary, the great Paul Keres. So he's doing this against all of the best players in the world. Let's just jump forward to standard Spanish that we've seen. Same opening. Keres plays knight d7 instead of queen to c7, and Fischer responds with, that's right, dc5. And it guarantees that structure because if he takes with the knight, then b4 would just fork. So he has to retake with the pawn, and look what we have. Another focus formation. Fischer's created the exact same formation again, a formation he knows inside and out. Keres, knowing this, tries to take the game into a different type of water, basically. He tries to change the structure. Unfortunately, he does, but he ends up even in worse shape. After knight bd2, queen c7, knight f1, knight b6, you'll notice, Keres, those knights are kind of on the queen side. If Fischer were to attack the king, they might be out of play, not be able to get back for the defense. Knight e3, rook d8, hitting the queen, queen e2, bishop e6, knight to d5. He jumps right in. He wants to open up lines. Even at the cost of a pawn, it's not really important, but he doesn't lose a pawn, as you will see. Knight d5, e d5, bishop d5, and knight takes e5. And white is already winning. Against a legendary player in 19 moves, this position, white already has a winning position. And why has this happened? Because Fischer entered a structure he knew really, really well. The threats that white has here, the bishop coming to f4, putting pressure on black's queen, it just, the position is over quickly. Now, the game goes on for a bit, the rook a7, bishop to f4, but the threats down the e-file, the threats against the queen, queen b6, rook a to d1, and look at this. Look at every single piece that Fischer has. Every single piece well developed on its ideal squares. Black has the knight stuck over on the side with a5. This is a perfect position. So we won't go deeper into this game, but another example of Fischer using this structure. And let's take a look at one more. And this game was played against a great American player of the time, Grandmaster Arthur Bisguier, and another Spanish, d6, h3, knight a5, bishop c2, d5, c4. Notice how Fischer isn't entering brand new positions and new structures over and over again where he has to figure things out over the board. He's entering structures he knows and he's familiar with. He knows the piece maneuvers, he knows the ideas. Queen c7, knight bd2, knight c6, dc5, dc5. We got our focus formation again, just like clockwork. Knight f1, same old, go to g3, go to e3. Rook d8, queen e2, knight to h5, threatening to come into f4. So he plays g3. Now that looks like it hangs the h3 pawn, but if bishop h3, then knight to g5, and white gets a good position. Bishop takes knight, and if here black plays bishop f1, then white would play bishop takes rook at d8, and that actually wins an exchange because he's grabbing a rook, whereas black only grabbed a knight. So the best line for black is knight f6, but then you just take the knight, destroying the pawn structure around the king, and after knight e3, there are far too many threats. White's just winning. G4 is threatened, which would trap the bishop at h3. You got the rook coming over, the game would be over. So Arthur Bisguier plays g6, h4, bishop e6, knight e3, f6, knight to d5. If bishop takes, which is not what he played, e d5, rook d5, then Fischer said c4 was a strong move for white. It turns out modern computers show that that isn't that strong, but if you play a4 first, then take, and then play c4, it is a strong move. I don't fully understand why. It's a little above my pay grade. I think the main reason is that in this position, the pawns can't be used to block a bishop if it goes to b3, and it just is a little bit easier for white in that case. It also opens the a file for the rook. But instead, he plays queen to b7 anyway. Knight takes e7 check, queen e7, and what do we have? The two bishops. So even the same basic advantages keep cropping up over and over again. Knight h2 with the threat of hopping into g4. Knight to g7, knight g4, c4. So again, we see black trying to claim this d3 square, but again, we see it being just too slow. The queen goes to f3, hitting the f6 pawn. So bishop takes the knight, queen takes g4. Now he has what they call the two bishops pure, which means he has the two bishops and his opponent has none. And in this position, I believe that probably is a bit of an advantage. Knight e6, trying to play knight c5, knight d3, h5, attacking the king, king h8, king g2, prepping the rook h1, same themes over and over and over again. g5, now this clogs things up, but it creates a lot of weaknesses, a lot of light squared weaknesses around the king. Bishop to e3, and here Arthur Bisguier makes a really cool move. It's actually a very strong move. He was a strong player. Instead of playing the knight to c5, or it could just be taken, and it would never be able to get into d3, he plays this really strong move, knight to f4 check. He goes in this way, and Fischer can't take with the g-pawn, because then he takes with the g-pawn, and he's threatening rook to g8, pinning the queen, as well as pawn takes a bishop. That would be terrible. And if he takes with the bishop, just f4, now the knight can pop into e5. So a really creative way to get the knight into to d3. King h2, it's still not enough, unfortunately. Knight to d3, bishop d3, c d3, and now he's got this pawn weakness on d3 that white can work on, which he immediately does, putting pressure on the newly weakened pawn. Rook d7, rook d2, knight a5. He wants to go to c4 and attack the rook and the bishop simultaneously. b3 keeps the knight out. Queen d6. A better move might have been knight to b7. The real problem with queen to d6 is now he's defending the pawn with his queen as the lead defender. You don't want your strongest piece defending your weakest pawn. So he doubles against it. Rook to e8. But now Fischer plays rook takes, queen takes, and now he has this really nice, very efficient move. It's not the only winning move, but it's really a nice, efficient move. Queen takes rook, forcing queen takes queen, and rook takes d7, and Arthur Bisguier resigned in this position because this is an easy endgame win for Fischer. Of course, he's got the extra pawn. The bishop is stronger than the knight. The knight's going to have a very hard time activating, but most of all, his king can penetrate very easily. With h3, g4, f5, black is lost, and Arthur Bisguier resigned. So we see a real cheat code in chess. One of Bobby Fischer's secrets. You can make it your secret too. Find a structure you really like and learn it inside and out and recreate it over and over in your games. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon. Bye.